the tools, just that metaphor you just provided, it actually seems to really mirror a conversation I was having last night with someone who they were discussing the perspective of like, code is law in the Ethereum space. And it's like, well, okay, let's say it is, but there's this fundamental problem with law that is like eternal. It's like the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, right? And I think what you're commenting on is like, spirit is not just like, oh, well, these are my opinions, or this is like, the vibe of the times, but ultimately, like, what is the culture that ends up shaping our interpretation of these things that gives meaning to these structures, and for example, also gives people reason to participate in these structures, right? Part of that fundamental question is like, an adoption question at the end of the day as well, right? But that's maybe blowing it a little bit too far out of scope. Yeah.
I don't know how to parse those either. I often cheat as well, and I say that the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to figure out the desirable dynamics, and then the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to get all of us collectively into dancing in that new way. And this kind of makes sense, right? If you've ever learned to partner dance, one of the prerequisites is that you know how to do it, and then you can put the music on with all these people, and you can start to ask people to dance, and you can figure out how to make it fun, etc. And actually, those two can evolve with one another and next to one another. But unless you have the music that you're going to be dancing to, you're going to have a relatively bad time. So I'm with you. Like factor out adoption first, figure out the patterns, and then figure out the rest. We know that startups know how to do the adoption problem, the two-sided market problem, etc. But what many people don't know is how to do the first part. How do you think about doing the first part?
Yeah, how do I think about doing the first part? Is that a question you're posing at me?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Part of why we started this podcast is because we want to ask other people that question, right? But and not as a cop out, because I think there's a couple different ways I can answer that, and ground it in some of my startup experience. But literally, the reason that we're doing this podcast in the most fundamental sense is like, we want more conversations like this to be happening, right? Like, we don't need to like blow up and get a bunch of viewers in order to just be participating like with our community. Even like if my friends listen to this and they expand their understanding of a lot of these concepts that we're going to be talking about, that we are already talking about with you, we're going to be talking about with other people. And again, a big theme of what we're going to get into is like how to ground these things, how to understand with these different approaches to Web3 implementations and cultural organizing and alternative narratives around economic exchanges and things like that, and how to test them out in your community, how to learn from experiments that other people are running, right? That's kind of the core focus of what's motivating us. We've just seen so much of this, like, for example, happening in the Green Pill podcast, where I think it's an amazing podcast for Web3 people, right? Like all of us, I think it's a great podcast for us to pick up ideas from other people that are already in the space. I think a little less so when it comes to like getting those conversations out to more of your average person, let's say, not your average person, but average Web2 person, right? Average tech person, where a lot of these ideas still, they hear Web3 and they think, oh, NFT scams, even though these are savvy people that understand that there are problems with the systems we're dealing with, and they understand the promises of Web3 in the abstract. But the question is like, show me the money, right? Like, where is it? Where are the results? And that's, at the end of the day, what we want to get into, right? Which I think is a good segue to maybe some of the tools you're working on as well.
Yeah. Or man, there's so much to say, and
feel free to throw something else out before that. I'll
aim to terminate the sentence here with something about tools, and maybe in fact we'll start there, because there's an excellent quote about how if you want people to behave in a new way, then do not try and teach them the new way. Give them a new tool, and then by way of the tool, allow them to learn the new way. And so I'm very much a fan of tools, but only insofar as they're actually solving problems for people. And I think the point that you make is really good, which is that many people recognize that, you had said, show me the money. I think it's even more than that. It's like, show me the thing that's more than money, right? Because the people that are in the Web2 space, they notice that it seems to be that the only thing that's happening in Web3 is a bunch of people concerned about token go up. And so
yeah, I used the worst metaphor, to be fair. I just went for whatever emotional thing, like, show me the money. It was more of an emotional affect rather than a literal, like, yeah, we should focus on capital, just to clarify. But yeah.
No, I know your intent, which is why I said it, because
Yeah.
because to a lot of people, it's not clear that there is an opportunity here. It's not clear that there is there's something worth paying attention to, that something is shifted. And so maybe it's worth bolstering that first before we dive into any particular tools, which is just to say that when you and I sit down to play a card game, we're voluntarily opting into something fun that we're going to do for the next 45 minutes or whatever. And we choose to do this because the game has good dynamics. And of course, there's many possible card games that you can play, but very few of them have survived, because the ones that have survived are, like, for some reason, preferable to play. People enjoy them and they connect with one another, and it makes them think and whatnot. And it turns out that the same might be said is true of the world that we live in, that we are all living inside of these games that they're not natural things, although we often think that they are. They're as natural, say, as like feudalism was to a peasant 200 years ago, which is that it seemed natural. It seemed like it came from God, quite literally. But then now, of course, we don't live under that world. A new world can exist. It can be internally coherent, and it can offer a lot more liberation for the people that are in it. And so the promise and the opportunity, I think, of Web3 is that because we have this new ability, this new superpower to kind of agree on things, and in this case, it's just agreeing on the order of a set of transactions, that there are new games that we can play, that we can build on top of that. And so then the question is, what games might we create? And we've seen some of the simple games, right? Of course, we've seen the simplest, dumbest, worst games come out first, because they're also the easiest ones to make. And so we've seen Token Go Up, and we've seen Luna Terra, and we've seen a centralized product that claimed to be decentralized, which was FTX, and probably more. Like, how many scams have come from the Web3 world? And I really do have a frustration with that. Like, I've talked to y'all both about this before, where I've just said that I felt like people are peeing in my pool. I think specifically what I said is I felt like people are peeing in my motherfucking pool, because I think that this is beautiful technology that can be used in lovely and liberating ways, and yet it is being used in cortisol ways, right? It's being used in amygdala ways in order to just capture people and play off some of our worst instincts and desperation. And so that's where we are today. That's what we're leaving right now. The people who are left in the space, hopefully, are the ones that are actually building things that they believe deserve to exist. I think we should be grateful for the bear market that we're in. And I am a big believer in the phoenix that will rise from the ashes. There's these beautiful flowers that grow in Colorado after a wildfire goes through, and they're like vibrant violet, and they have this smell to them that is almost overwhelming, like extremely sweet and lovely. And it's a reminder that even once the fire goes through, that maybe that's like the very moment that you want to go out there and once again be in that context. So I'm hopeful that that's what we're about to see. And so what are we about to see? Well, let's start with code is law. And the idea that crypto encodes is that this idea that code is law, and it's actually not. Code is code, and law is really useful. And so one way to think about what I'm trying to build is the minimal code necessary in order to enable a new form of law to exist. And even the word law isn't going to be sufficient for what we're describing here, because actually what we're talking about is this system of predictions of the outcomes that are likely to be seen based on the models that people believe. So they think that trees grow in a certain way, and that is a model of the world, and that model of the world, when run forward, has some predictions that it comes up with, and that then those predictions can be compared against reality. And if it's not meeting reality, then that gives you some sort of information. And that information is either our model is wrong, or something is wrong with our sensor, or something like this, right? So this is what I'm hopeful for as the future of governance, is something that could maybe be called prediction-based governance. It's related to maybe futarchy, if people are familiar with futarchy, which is basically governance via prediction. And really where the idea comes from is from the world of, there's a theory of the brain. It's called the Bayesian theory of the brain. And the Bayesian brain theory has information go the opposite direction that you would normally think. So what people used to think, I think like Plato perhaps was somebody that believed this, was that information came in, and then that your brain made sense of it, like made sense of the world, and it created models based off of information. But now what's believed, this Bayesian theory of the brain, is that it's the other way around, that actually you have these models in your head, and your models make predictions about the world, and the only information that you get is the surprise when you find out that, oh, my model isn't working right. And if you live in a world that is command and control, which is kind of the world that we live in right now, which is just top down, then it's not sensitive to surprise, right? It kind of just like, it just barrels through you. But if instead you live in a Bayesian world where something behaving in a way that's surprising gets propagated back up to the top of the system, then this becomes like a lovely world to exist in. It's like, it's kind of the difference. I think these are like bad gender stereotypes, but it's the difference between the drunk father and the attentive mother, right? You know, the one who has the way that he thinks it should be, and then the attentive mother that says, "Huh, I had never noticed about that about you before." You know, I'm sure your mothers have done this to you before. So this is the world that I think that we can build if we build this sort of technology, and that's what I'm working on right now. So I'm working on that with a project called Option, which does this through game theory and category theory. And I'm working on this in a project called Digital Gaia, which does this with active inference and what's called surrogate modeling.